So, how did we get here? How did one of the most coveted competitions in the world, an event with millions of dollars put into security, manage to lose its crown jewel, the Jules Rimet Trophy, or more commonly known as the World Cup Trophy? So, in 1966, England was the host nation of the FIFA World Cup, the global sporting event that happens every 4 years. However, on Sunday the 20th of March 1966, the FIFA World Cup trophy was stolen. The world news went into a frenzy over this, and the FA was worried what would happen before the event, as they had recently been given the trophy for safekeeping prior to the hosting of the World Cup. And of course, if theft is afoot, who better than to call the London Metropolitan Police, who scrambled to track down where the trophy had gone. But we should probably go into detail of how it was stolen, if it was robbed from somebody without them realising, if it was stolen from someone's house maybe. Nope, it was stolen from a place where you would at least expect where it could be stolen from. The World Cup was stolen from an exhibition it was part of, which was in Central Hall in Westminster, a place where you would assume that, security is pretty high. But clearly that wasn't the case. This happened when another church service was occurring elsewhere in the building, the perfect opportunity to slip in and grab hold of the £30,000 gold-plated trophy. Yeah, you can't really make this up, people, can you? Interestingly, the World Cup was on display with a sporting Stampex collection, which was worth £3 million. And this is also interesting because if anybody was out there to make money, surely you would steal the much smaller stamp collection that you could very easily get out with and ignore the World Cup trophy. But alas, it was the trophy that was taken. Al Sagard, the security firm responsible for the trophy's protection, apparently had 2 guards present at the time of the theft. Either that was a complete lie, or they need to look out for some new security guards. So yes, like I said, this became world news, with many people having their own input into what happened. Brazil themselves even stepped forward and pretty much said that this was sacrilege, and that even the thieves of Brazil wouldn't do this because they loved football so much. And this statement is hilariously ironic for reasons we will get onto very shortly. Detectives and forensic experts were on the scene to try and crack the case, seeing if they could find any clues or information as to the whereabouts of this gold-plated trophy. Police said the following. A suspicious-looking man was seen in the building at the time of the theft. He is described as being in his early 30s, of average height, with thin lips, greased black hair, and a possible scar on his face. Okay, so we're getting somewhere now. With many false reports and with people basically trying to follow up on leads that led to nowhere, this resulted in many occurrences of the London Underground even being shut due to potential sightings of this trophy, none of which came to fruition, until a ransom note landed on the desk of someone at the FA saying the following. Doubt you view with very much concern the loss of the World Cup. To me it is only so much scrap gold. If I don't hear from you by Thursday or Friday at the latest, I assume it's one for the pot. With the note was a demand of £15,000 in £1 and £5 notes, alongside the removable lining from the top of the trophy. No need to figure out if this was a hoax or not, this was the real deal, gentlemen. Detectives set up an operation to see if they could meet up with this guy and then catch him to be able to try and recover this trophy, so we'll see how they got on. The sender, only known as Jackson, agreed to meet in Battersea Park. A detective who went posing as the assistant for the FA chairman went with a briefcase of what looked like a stack of £15,000. There was only in fact £500 in the case, and the rest was bulked up with newspaper underneath. The anonymous man drove around the meeting spot for some time before going to the meeting. However, upon spotting a police backup van positioned and ready, he fled the scene. He fled the scene and was chased down, eventually being tackled and captured, and he was arrested at the time on suspicion of stealing the World Cup. At the police station, they recognised that Jackson was actually a man called Edward Betchley, known to the police as a thief, and he had been convicted of crimes related to this previously. This isn't the end, however, as they hadn't got the trophy back despite finding the man who was claiming to be responsible for its whereabouts. Edward denied that he'd stolen the trophy, but said that he could get it back for law enforcement if he was granted bail. He was of course denied, so nice try, man, nice try. Regardless of what happened, Edward actually came forward and said that he still loved the game. He still loved football and wanted England to win. Either he was genuine that he wanted his team to win, or he was just saying that in order to get out. So, I don't know which one it was, but yeah, support your own country. And you know what? He might just get what he wished for. He was eventually convicted as being the middleman in an operation and was convicted for 2 years. Part of the puzzle is here, but it seems that the actual burglar is still at large. Plus, that massive gold trophy that's still missing. So, what now? The trophy's still gone. What the hell are they meant to do? And that is where the hero of today's story comes into it. A dog called Pickles. Pickles and his owner David Corbett were walking in southeast London when Pickles began to sniff at a parcel, to which David went on to explain what happened next. It was wrapped in a tightly bound newspaper and string, laying against my neighbour's car wheel. I picked it up and it's quite heavy, though not very big. It wasn't a spectacular cup. At the time the IRA were at large, so I personally thought it was a bomb, so I put it down, picked it up and put it down again. Then curiosity took hold. I tore off a bit of the bottom and there was a plain disc. Then I tore around and there was Brazil, Germany, Uruguay. I ran back in and said to my wife, "I think I found the World Cup." So he grabbed the trophy and delivered it to the local police station, where they pretty much detained him and suspected that he was the one that stole the World Cup, asking him hours and hours worth of questions. He was eventually released, but I sort of don't blame them if some random guy just turns up with the World Cup one day, just saying he found it. Doesn't seem likely. The trophy itself was held for evidence for some time, but was released and ready to be there for the World Cup to begin shortly afterwards. Pickles the dog would even become a little bit of a celebrity himself, being on many TV shows and movies at the time, basically for being the dog that found the World Cup. He was given a year's supply of dog food and was given a medal for his brave, heroic dog sniffing skills. David Corbett attended the players' celebration dinner after the World Cup final and later received rewards totalling around £6,000. Which is funny, because if Edward had just handed it in, he would have made a decent amount without having had spent 2 years in prison. Maybe, depends if he covered his tracks well enough, mind you, and if he really wanted a year's supply worth of dog food. It would later transpire that the apparent suspects behind the theft was London's gangster Sidney Cuggiel, with the help of his brother Reg. Reg's son Gary even reflected on this strange incident and said that he stole it for the thrill of it and not for any financial gain. On the street after coming out of the doors, Sid lifted his jacket and said, "Here you are, Reg, look at this." He opened one side of his jacket and the World Cup was there. My dad went, "Fucking hell, Sid, what the fuck do you think you're doing with that?" My dad was freaking out and he knew there was no way they could sell the cup. They realised they had to give it back. The pair were never caught, which is why it took so long for this story to eventually come out and for people to figure out what the hell even happened and how the World Cup was stolen in the first place. England did go on and eventually won that World Cup, which was a very odd finish to such an incredible story about the World Cup being stolen, then found again before England, the host country, won that World Cup. It all sounded like a whirlwind of an event to me. However, the story's not quite done because we move to 4 years later, in which Brazil received the Jules Rimet trophy in perpetuity after winning the World Cup for a third time. So basically, because they were good at this whole football thing, they got to keep one forever. In 1983, the cup was stolen. Like I said earlier, this is pretty ironic and bold for Brazil to claim that nobody would actually do this to themselves in Brazil, only for this to happen to them a few years later. This one was never found and it was assumingly melted down and sold off due to being worth a fair bit of money. This is contested due to the fact that it is not in fact solid gold, so it would not be technically possible to melt down the trophy into a bullion in its entirety. Regardless, this trophy is still missing in action and has never been found since. And for whoever does find that trophy, I'm sure that there's a year's supply of dog food waiting for you. 23-year-old Frank Hayes had never won a race before, but was a young and aspiring rider. While originally a horse handler and stable hand, he would soon become very well known for the strangest reason. Yes, today we are talking about that time that a jockey rider won a race despite the fact he was dead. And you might be wondering, how the hell did that happen? Well, we are going to go into detail today and tell you exactly why this possibly happened. Originally growing up in Ireland, he would move to Brooklyn, New York to work as a stable hand for a horse breeder, tending and training horses for racing. This must have been all pretty difficult on Frank, with him wanting to be a racer, but when he trains the horses up, he's not the jockey that actually rides them. A professional jockey will take that horse and then win the race, despite the fact that he was the one that trained the horse. It must be pretty depressing, and I feel sorry for our boy Frank. With this being his aspiration for so long, he would be on the sidelines for quite some time, until a perfect opportunity came up for Frank, where he might actually have the chance to go ahead and race. Frank had managed to convince his boss to be able to go and race in the infamous Belmont Park Horse Circuit, commonly referred to as one of the finest race courses there is on the thoroughbred circuit. Frank had had enough of being on the sidelines, and now he wanted a piece of the action himself. Frank, who had trained up a young horse known as Sweet Kiss, who, to be honest, had no real prospect of winning a race, was the horse that was next one up for the challenge. We all love a good underdog story though, don't we? A newbie rider, a newbie horse, both going into a tournament together. What are the chances? It's almost like a movie. Now, you see that Frank didn't actually own the horse Sweet Kiss. The owner themselves actually was looking for a jockey to ride the horse as a test in the upcoming race. However, at the time, they couldn't find any other jockeys. So, Frank, being the one that trained the horse, volunteered to go forward and do the job himself. Mainly because they needed a rider, but this would also be the perfect opportunity that Frank had been looking for. When I said that he convinced his boss to ride the horse, what I meant was there was no one else to do the job, so they kinda had no choice. Either way, this worked for Frank. That race was the 4th of June 1923 steeplechase at Belmont Park in New York. Yes, this was very exciting stuff. However, this was all quite last minute, and for Frank to even have a chance of winning the race, he needed to take some pretty drastic steps. One big one, in fact, was the fact that he had to shed a lot of weight in a relatively short space of time in order to even stand a chance of getting the horse into the lead. Because at the end of the day, if the jockey's quite hefty, then that's only going to weigh and slow your horse down. Many jockeys are actually very light, so that means that Frank, well, he had to take some rather drastic measures. Yes, at the end of the day, this ain't no amateur race. He was in it for the win, and if he wanted to achieve his dreams, he had to act. And act he did. Whilst the details around exactly what happened aren't clear, it is believed that he reduced his body weight down to 130 pounds, spending hours on end jogging and denying himself any water in order to shed as much weight as possible. This was all to ensure that when he got on top of his horse, he was as light as he could possibly be to give Sweet Kiss the chance to go ahead and race. As you might have guessed, there is some pretty serious health risks by doing so much exercise without having any water before getting on top of a horse before doing a race. So things weren't really looking good from the offset. However, on the day in question, he arrived, he got on board Sweet Kiss and was ready to go for the gold. So, the race starts and all the horses are gone. However, to everyone's surprise, Sweet Kiss is actually pulling out in front, and even to Frank's shock, he doesn't know what to do. He's probably elated with the fact that he is actually in the lead in his very first race. Clearly, all that work he'd done had paid off. This must have been so exhilarating for him to be on the back of a horse, with his dream of winning a race, in sight, on the finishing line. He was going for it. He then had heart failure and died on the back of his horse. So, yeah, this ain't all sunshine and rainbows, unfortunately. Yep, this jockey had just slumped dead onto his horse, but nobody seemed to notice, mainly down to the fact that somehow he managed to stay on the back of the horse and didn't fall off. Many people were cheering him on, and Sweet Kiss got the win, got first and won the race. Unfortunately, Frank wasn't alive to see it. He'd already died by the time that the horse passed the finishing line. Nobody had even realised that Frank had died until the owner of the horse came up to congratulate him, and that was when they saw his body slump off the horse onto the ground. Dead. A doctor at the scene pronounced him dead there and then, which led to a very strange set of circumstances in which, even though he wasn't alive when he passed the finishing line, Technically, the jockey and the horse both passed the line at the same time, so does he deserve the win? Well, in this case in particular, they decided to bend the rules and, in his honour, give Sweet Kiss the win. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure that the official rules never even considered something like this would ever happen, so they had to waive the normal rules to make sure something like this was allowed. There has never really been an incident like this since, and this is the first and only rider to win a race being dead. As a matter of fact, on record, this is the only sportsperson to ever win any sporting event whilst being deceased, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. I mean, I don't think we'll probably ever see anything really like this happen again. Frank Hayes was buried 3 days later while still dressed in his racing silks. The New York Times speculated that the jockey's heart had given out as a result of the severe training in order to make the weight for the race, coupled with the excitement of winning his first race. The horse, Sweet Kiss, allegedly never rode again, but was given the very apt name, the Sweet Kiss of Death. And yes, anybody can technically claim to be the world's strongest man, and that's a pretty bold statement to make, I'm not going to lie, but technically there's nothing stopping you from doing it. Well, within reason anyway. This is like every time you go to the gym. You could be as buff as you want, and you go and you work out, but there's one rule of the gym. I always have it every time I go. Maybe it's just me. But the rule is every time you go and you pump iron, there's always that one guy that is bigger than you, in some shape or fashion. Either he can bench more, or he's bigger. It's just an unwritten rule. Regardless of where you go, there's always one person that's better at it than you are. However, if you were to stand there and say that you were the world's strongest man, by many measures, it actually means completely nothing. And the reason for that is, what is the world's strongest man? How do you measure it? How do you define that term? You tell me. Well, one good place to start might be the World's Strongest Man event. This is a title that people compete for pretty much every year, where people come together in a competition and try and win the title of the World's Strongest Man. Seems pretty straightforward. This competition is designed to push strong men to their absolute limits, challenging not only their physical strength, but their agility and mental toughness too. Yes, it's pretty much a competition where they weed out all those beta males and get the true alpha Chad to slap that title on his head and say that he's the world's strongest. Pretty cool, and if that's what you want to go for, then that's a fairly standard measure that you'd use. Just to give you a general idea of what's involved in the World's Strongest Man competition, you might have people deadlifting giant concrete blocks, people pulling vehicles and trucks, and then other people tossing logs around. All pretty much stuff which you'd have to be pretty ripped to be able to do without breaking a sweat. The World's Strongest Man competition started in 1977, where the first ever WSM contest was held in Universal Studios, California. Bruce Wilhelm wins the first of his 2 victories and is crowned the world's first strongest man. The next 3 years would be won by a man called Bill Kazmaier, winning his first 3 championship titles as the world's strongest man. This all sounds pretty standard, until Bill sits down in 1984 and watches a television commercial which pretty much shows the following. This TV commercial showed another man called John Wooten lifting a car and then claiming to be the world's strongest man. Which, I mean, by his sense of the word, he thinks is completely false. Bill, seems though that he's the guy that's won the title 3 times at this point, believes that he is the world's strongest man, and for anybody else to blatantly claim that they have that title is completely unacceptable. So he does the one thing that anybody in this situation would rightly do: sue the living hell out of it, because why the hell not? It's the American way. Bill Kazmaier was the world's strongest man more times than anyone else at that point, claiming that if anyone was going to use the title of the world's strongest man, it should be rightly him, by measure of the fact that he had actually won more titles than anyone else, and won the competition multiple times in the past. Because yes, if there is a world's strongest man, you can't have 2 people that are the world's strongest men. Nah. This is just a one-man deal. If there's 2 people vying for the same title, they're going to have to battle it out. And whilst I would be very, very thrilled if the judge asked them to do a log hurling contest. That's not how the law works, and unfortunately we had to have a court hearing instead. The arguments were that Keismer was the only one who could exclusively use that title, while the defense of Wooten was that Keismer may claim to be the world's strongest man, but had no exclusive right to use that title, meaning that he could, and pretty much anyone else, could claim to be the world's strongest man. It kind of diminishes the whole title if anybody can just brazenly throw it around with nothing to back it up. Almost like a participation trophy. You weren't quite there, but you were there, so you should get something for it. Everybody can be the world's strongest man. You just have to believe in yourself. Like I said earlier, how do you define what the world's strongest man is? Yes, I mean, one way to do it is if you take a very particular and specialised area, say for example, someone who was strapped to a truck and pulled it a certain amount of distance. And you could measure strength by how quickly someone was able to do that. So, I don't know, the quickest person to pull a truck 10 metres. That's just something off the top of my head. If you can do it faster than anybody else, then you could argue that you are the world's strongest man. I mean, it would be pretty hard to argue that's not the case when you've just pulled a semi-truck 10 metres in the space of 10 seconds, but you be the judge of that. You might have done that, but someone else might be able to do, say for example, the longest Hercules hold for a certain period of time. For those that don't know, this is a Hercules hold, and it looks pretty strong and pretty hard. If someone else can beat you to that, surely they might be the world's strongest man. Which one's more impressive, and which one would you consider to be the world's strongest man? Dunno. I guess that's why they got a judge involved. Keismer tried to argue that anybody using the phrase was doing so inappropriately, and that by applying this term liberally made it really that only one person could have it. As you might imagine, the lawsuit was well and truly thrown out of court. At the heart of the court's rejection, the main claim was that it was determined Keismer was not entitled to the exclusive use of the phrase the world's strongest man. No official body would grant the use of the term. The world's strongest man, which, although there was a competition that gave the title of the world's strongest man, is a very specific set of events and circumstances, and was by no means a true way to test someone's strength and to ultimately prove that you are, beyond all doubt, the world's strongest man. The judge even went as far to say that the entire term was quite nebulous because, well, anybody could claim to be the world's strongest man. And with that, the value of that title went straight down the pan. Of course, that would be the case if you cited this case as precedent. So let me just keep up my gains so I can become the world's strongest man without any doubt or question about who the world's strongest man actually was. So, yeah. And, oh boy, it's warm in here today. And blatant cheating should not be encouraged by any means. Yes, I'm gonna climb atop my stallion and white knight this bitch. No one's cheating in here. Yes, whilst we shouldn't do it, there are plenty of people that do. And for something like this, to have the gall to even try and cheat your way through this, and to try and think that people wouldn't figure it out, is bold, to say the least. And today is no different. We are talking about the marathon fraudster themselves. Rosie Ruiz was a Cuban-American marathon runner, born in Cuba and then moved to Memphis, Florida in 1962, at the age of 8 years old. Clearly with a passion for running, Rosie would qualify for the New York Marathon in 1979, with an overall time of 2 hours, 56 minutes and 29 seconds, the 11th woman overall. This was enough for her to qualify for the Boston Marathon, and that is awesome. Really, really impressive. So what's with the controversy? Well, let's just say that this was a precursor for things to come. So yeah, even before we get onto the big fiasco itself, this was also not quite as clean cut as you'd think it would be, but we'll get there. This marathon run in particular would just be a taste for her. She originally missed the application period to even apply for the run on the New York Marathon in the first place, claiming to the race officials that she had terminal brain cancer. In an act of grace, she was permitted to run despite having missed the deadline. So yeah, I was going to praise the boldness of the cheating just by some little bit. The fact that somebody has the gall to even try it, there'd be a little slither of respect. But saying that, no respect. Fuck you. Anyway, whilst this wasn't known at the time, the race time she achieved to qualify for the Boston Marathon was not true either. Whilst she did run the race, months later it would be discovered that she actually took the subway, of all things, to the finish line and missed a big portion of the race. The sheer cheek of it. So, with the time that she got, she qualified for the Boston Marathon. And for those of you that don't know, this marathon race is probably one of the world's most well-known marathon races. As a matter of fact, the Boston Marathon is known as the world's oldest annual marathon, known as one of the world's best-known racing events. So to qualify for this is a pretty big deal. So, she ran the Boston Marathon on the 21st of April 1980, and adhered to, well, for a woman apparently dying of brain cancer, won the Boston Marathon's female category, with a time of 2 hours 31 and 56 seconds. This time is incredible because this would have been the fastest woman to ever run the marathon, and this would be the third fastest time for a woman on any marathon ever. This is quick, and you know what? If it was all true, this would have been an incredible story. Somebody who had terminal brain cancer to beat the odds and become one of the most fastest women ever. I think it would have been, it would have been a pretty great story. Suspicions mounted on the legitimacy of the run time, especially from the man who had just won the Boston Marathon himself, Bill Rogers, who upon speaking with her afterwards, noticed that she didn't share any of the intimate knowledge of the track that they'd just run, such as intervals and splits, something which a professional runner would be able to recall without any real issues. And for someone that had just won a marathon for women and to achieve a run time equal to any of the greats in the sport, she was surprisingly not out of breath. She seemed fine, actually. This was particularly strange. Just wander up and just dozy on in thinking, oh yeah, I've just won. No problem, no heavy breathing, no sweats. I'm bright as day. Well, upon further inspection, she also didn't share the same body tone and physique like many elite runners shared at the time. She didn't look like what you'd expect a Boston Marathon winner to look like, physique-wise anyway. You know, not because of the fact that I'm staring at people's thighs or anything, not normally anyway, but she was much less muscly than other people who shared similar times to her. Either this woman was superhuman, or there was a little bit more going on than we first realised. This all seemed a bit fishy, but what was even more fishy was for the eagle-eyes amongst you was that the time that she had in her New York Marathon and Boston Marathon times was 25 minutes quicker. This is unheard of. Her resting heart rate when tested was also a lot lower than that of a standard professional runner, which, you know, after a marathon is very strange. When asked by a reporter why she didn't seem more fatigued after the grueling race, she said, "I got up with a lot more energy this morning." Sure. On top of that, many other runners didn't recall seeing her at many of the checkpoints, and many people that were watching the race didn't even see her when they were cheering the racers on. So, what the hell happened? New York City Marathon officials launched an investigation, and they basically couldn't find any sign of Rosie near the finish line. After digging further, and after assessing the evidence, it was determined by the New York City Marathon Committee to retrospectively disqualify Rosie, and claimed that there was absolutely no way that she could have ran the entire course. Shock horror. As a matter of fact, they even managed to get some eyewitness reports at Commonwealth Avenue during the race, where spectators saw her bolt out of the track and disappear into the crowd. So clearly, she, for some strange reason, didn't carry on with the race. And then she was seen much later, nearer the end of the track. So somehow, she got there using some form of taxi or subway or some form of public transport to be able to effectively skip a lot of the marathon to get this incredibly mega time. Either way, she didn't complete the race in its entirety. Not at the time she claimed anyway. Later in the same week, the Boston Athletic Association then disqualified her from the Boston Marathon, losing both her rankings and positions from those races. The true winners were announced, and Rosie was known from then on as a cheat. Was it worth it? Was it worth it, Rosie? All that fame and glory you could have had, just to make a few white lies and say that you had terminal brain cancer and that you were one of the fastest women to ever run a marathon, the hurdle was pretty high to achieve that, and to make everybody believe it. Just to give you an idea of the type of person we're dealing with, in 1982, just 2 years later after this incident, she was arrested for embezzling, which would be the equivalent of about $168,000 today, from the real estate company she worked for. So, yeah, you'd think that maybe whoever hired her after being in the news and all that might have known the kind of person they were getting themselves in for. A liar and a cheat. But, hey, you live and learn, I guess. As crazy as this story is, you'd be surprised, or maybe not so, that there are actually a lot of cheats in the sport at this time as well, as many people have been caught out for various different ways that they've cheated events, be it skipping the track, or using narcotics to improve performance, all those sorts of things. But either it doesn't happen quite as often anymore, or people have got so good at it that people just don't get caught as much these days. Whilst it still happens, it's not quite as rampant as perhaps it once was. And you know what? I just don't understand how people can get off at this. I mean, yes, you might be able to cheat and get away with it, and then get some great praise and award, everybody cheers, cool. But you must know deep down that you aren't that person. You haven't achieved that. And worst of all, you've taken that away from someone else who's actually really tried and trained to be incredible at that sport, and for some stupid reason you decided to cheat it. So for those out there who are cheating, stop it. No. Bad. If I had a stick, I'd bonk you on the head right now. And I want you to think for a moment about any two sports that you can slap together and make something completely new out of it, particularly if it's one that is very unexpected. Two completely different sports that you would expect would never go together. I mean, just one as an example, it's not particularly odd by any means, but triathlon, which is basically just three existing sporting events wrapped together into one. However, the one we're talking about today is very unique due to the fact that it is possibly two completely different sports that you would never assume would ever go together. Chess boxing, as you might imagine, is a competitive game where two athletes duke it out in a hybrid sport of the traditional disciplines of chess and boxing, all at the same time. So, how does it work? The two competitors will alternate rounds between chess and boxing, where they will bounce in short blitz rounds from trying to outwit their opponent in a classic game of chess to beating the living hell out of each other in the ring, back and forth until either there is a checkmate or a straight knockout. And no, you can't get the knockout during the chess part of the tournament. Standard rules dictate that you play a 4-minute round of chess, then a 3-minute round of boxing, then returning to a round of chess, and in total the match will consist of 11 rounds, each with a 1-minute interval between them. So there's not much room to think or breathe. The normal rules apply to each game, so if there is no decisive winner, you can win either by time penalty as per the chess rules, or if a boxing decision finds in your favour in the event that there's a draw during the chess part of the game. What I find particularly amazing about this is during the boxing part, yes, you are in the ring, but every time it swaps to the chess part, basically that 1-minute turnaround involves someone bringing out a chessboard, putting it in the centre of the ring, and then the actual boxing players have to sit there, have a single glove removed so they can play their rounds of chess. Then, once it's over, the board gets carefully picked up and carried away. The boxing glove goes back on, and then they're ready for the next round. And yes, this game is taken very seriously. So seriously, in fact, that during the chess part of the game, the players have to wear ear defenders to prevent hearing anything from the outside. This will not only prevent cheating in that the audience can't shout commands over to the players, but in addition it also helps them focus. And no, there's not really much need for ear defenders during the boxing part of the game, because the only sound you're going to be hearing from the audience are screams and cheers when you get laid out on the canvas. The man who is known for inventing the sport is an artist called Enki Bilal. He introduced the concept of chess boxing in some of his comic books in 1992, and since it has grown into a recognised sport we all know and love today. And for many people watching, that sport you just discovered was a thing today. The governing bodies of chess boxing are the World Chess Boxing Association, the WCBA, and the World Chess Boxing Organisation, the WCBO. Of course, each prestigious in their own right, but was established to primarily help train people in the sport. Or sports. I mean, at the end of the day, it's two sports in one, so you take your pick. All I do know from this is that if you can play chess boxing, you must be a pretty well-rounded individual for being fairly competent at both the chess side and the boxing side. To even have a chance to compete in the sport, you need to have a baseline understanding and competency in both aspects of the game. So yes, you can be the captain of the chess team, but if you get into the boxing side and can't hold your own, you're not going to last 10 seconds in there. Unless you're really, really good at chess. To even compete, you need to have a chess rating of 1800 to compete in the sport. Now, I ain't no chess connoisseur, but from what I understand, you have to be at least semi-professional to have that type of rating. So it's not like your average Joe can just pop in there and start playing chess boxing. There is a minimum level requirement here, which means that you have to be pretty good at chess in order to actually get it in play. So particularly for the chess part, you need to be quite experienced in that you're playing at either a national or international level, so pretty dang good. The reason for this is to try and make the game fair. I mean, at the end of the day, if you just had someone who didn't really understand chess that much, but was a heavyweight boxer and they came in and absolutely laid you out in a few moments, then what's really the point of the chess part? What they want is competitors who are going to be good at both parts of the sport, in order for both to be interesting and also potentially game-changing. Just to demonstrate how seriously this is taken, there are even refs in the chess portion to step in and pressure a player who is suspected of purposefully stalling a losing chess game. What you might have realised, if you have any knowledge of professional chess whatsoever, is that this effectively mimics that of a standard speed chess match. Stall for too long and you're going to find yourself on the losing end of the game. Honestly, this all sounds a little bit crazy. If I was put into the boxing side, I might have a very slim chance of holding my own. The chess side, on the other hand, I'd have no chance. I'm the kind of person that calls a knight a horse, so that should give you a good indication of my skill and knowledge in the game of chess. But the sport sounds like fun and an interesting take on, well, both sports. Maybe one day I'll be an audience member so I can see my very own chess boxing game and to see what it's like from the grit and concentration of chess to then people walloping on each other in the boxing part. Sounds like fun. And of course, all in the name of sportsmanship. If you like the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to be notified as soon as I upload my next video, be sure to hit the bell button. And if you've got any ideas for what topics you'd like me to discuss next, let me know down in the comments below. As always, sources used in the video will be in the description. I really want to see more sports get clumped together to create something truly unique, and I can think of two sports off the top of my head which have been longing to be put together. MMA and Quidditch. Guys, hear me out. All I want to see is a wizard doing a roundhouse kick and then pile driving someone into the floor. That sounds like entertainment. But you never know. I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.